If you really think it's over, then tell me why that photo exists. The words landed softer than a whisper, but they echoed louder than anything Elena Brooks had heard all week, maybe all year. Her fingers were still trembling when she let go of the photograph, the glossy paper sliding across the polished wood table between them, catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Adrian Wolfe. Outside, Manhattan moved the way it always did, fast, indifferent, endless. But inside that office, everything had stopped. Elena folded her arms as if that could hold her together. I don't need a photo to tell me what I already know, she said, her voice thin but steady, the kind of steady that only comes after too many sleepless nights and too many bills stacked on a kitchen counter. Adrian didn't sit. He didn't move at all. 6'2", perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the kind of presence that made boardrooms go quiet before he even spoke, yet now, he just stood there, staring at the image like it might rewrite reality if he looked long enough. You said you don't remember, he said finally, his tone calm, controlled, but threaded with something deeper. Then explain this. Elena's eyes dropped despite herself. She had seen the photo a dozen times already. Each time, it felt like someone else's life. There she was, her hair loose, falling over her shoulder, her face softer than she ever saw it in the mirror now. Asleep. Peaceful. And beside her, a man. His face partly turned away, shadowed, but close enough that their shoulders touched. Close enough that it meant something. Too much. Her throat tightened. I told you, she whispered. I don't know when that was taken. Adrian stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The city light caught the edge of a ring on his hand, platinum, understated, unmistakable. That's my watch, he said, nodding toward the man's wrist in the photo. Limited edition. There are maybe 10 in the country. Elena looked again. She hadn't noticed before. Or maybe she hadn't wanted to. The detail was small. Too small. But it changed everything. Her pulse quickened, a dull thud against her ribs. That doesn't prove anything, she said, though the certainty in her voice was already fading. Adrian exhaled quietly, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man chasing a memory that refused to stay still. It proves I was there, he said. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Somewhere deep in the building, an elevator chimed. A distant reminder that the world hadn't ended, just hers. Elena turned away, pressing her palm against the cool glass window. 40 stories below, yellow taxis crawled through traffic, people crossing streets without looking up, without knowing that a single photograph was unraveling someone's entire life above them. Even if you were there, she said softly, it doesn't change anything. Behind her, Adrian's voice came again, quieter this time. It changes everything. She closed her eyes. For a second, just a second, there was something. A flicker. A room that smelled like antiseptic. A low hum. A weight beside her that felt safe. Her breath caught. Then it was gone. Just like every other time she tried to remember. She shook her head, pushing the feeling away. No, she said, firmer now. It's over. Adrian didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just picked up the photo, his thumb brushing lightly over the edge as if it were something fragile. Then answer me one thing, he said. Elena hesitated. Just for a heartbeat. What? She asked. Adrian looked up, his eyes locking onto hers with a quiet intensity that made it impossible to look away. If you don't remember that night, then who took the photo? The question didn't feel like a question. It felt like a door opening somewhere deep inside her, slow, creaking, inevitable. And for the first time since she had walked into that office, Elena wasn't sure she wanted to know what was on the other side. Elena did not answer right away because the question did not feel like something she could answer with logic. It felt like something buried beneath months or maybe years of exhaustion and survival, something her mind had quietly locked away without asking permission. And now it was being pulled back into the light piece by piece whether she was ready or not. She turned slowly, her back still brushing the cold glass as she looked at Adrian again, really looked this time, not as the distant, powerful man she had tried to forget, but as someone standing inside the same unanswered moment as her. "I do not know," she said, softer now, almost admitting it to herself instead of him. Adrian nodded once as if he had expected that answer all along, then he walked past her toward his desk, setting the photo down carefully, not like evidence but like something that mattered, something that should not be damaged. He tapped the edge of it lightly, his mind clearly already moving ahead. "Photos do not take themselves," he said, calm but certain. "Someone was there." Elena's chest tightened, because that part was undeniable. There had been a third presence, someone watching, someone choosing to capture that exact moment, not before, not after that moment. She swallowed, her throat dry. "Even if someone was there, it does not mean anything," she said, but the words felt weaker now, thinner. Adrian glanced at her, his eyes sharp but not cruel, just focused. "It means everything," he replied. Then he reached for his phone, unlocking it with a quick motion, the screen lighting up against the dim office. "This building has security archives," he said, more to himself than to her. "And if that night happened anywhere connected to me, there will be a record." Elena shook her head instinctively, stepping forward. "You cannot just dig into things like that," she said, but she knew he could. Men like Adrian Wolfe did not ask permission from the past. They uncovered it, controlled it, reshaped it. He paused, looking at her again, and for a moment his expression softened, just enough to make her hesitate. "Do you really want to walk away without knowing?" he asked quietly, the question landing heavier than before, because now it was not about him, it was about her, about the gap in her own memory. Elena's fingers curled slightly at her sides. She thought of her small apartment, the narrow kitchen, the stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band, the quiet breathing she heard every night from the next room that kept her grounded, kept her moving forward. She had built a life on what she did know, not what she did not. "I have lived without that answer this long," she said, but even she could hear the hesitation in it. Adrian did not push, he simply turned the phone toward her, the screen now showing a paused video frame, grainy, time-stamped, security footage. Elena's breath caught. She stepped closer despite herself. The image was not clear, just shapes, shadows, a hallway lit by harsh white lights, a figure moving slowly, supporting another. Her heart began to race as something deep inside her stirred again. That same flicker, that same almost memory, the hum, the light, the feeling of holding on to someone who needed her. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Adrian's voice dropped, steady, controlled. "From a private clinic outside the city," he said. "The date matches the timestamp on the photo." Elena stared at the screen, her reflection faintly overlapping the blurred figure, her pulse loud in her ears. "Play it," she said before she could stop herself. Adrian hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then pressed play. The footage moved, slow and silent, the woman in the frame struggling slightly as she guided the man beside her down the corridor, his steps unsteady but trusting, and even through the blur, through the distance, Elena knew, she knew in the way you recognize your own shadow without seeing your face. Her hand lifted unconsciously toward the screen, her breath shallow now. "That is me," she said, barely audible. Adrian did not look away from the footage. "Yes," he said quietly. "And you were not alone." Elena's hand hovered inches from the screen, her fingers trembling as if the image itself carried a charge, something alive that could pull her back into a moment she did not fully remember but somehow still felt. The hallway flickered slightly in the grainy footage, fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the floor, and there she was again, moving slowly, carefully. Her arm wrapped around the man beside her as if she refused to let him fall. Her breath grew shallow as a pressure built. Behind her eyes, not pain, not fear, something closer to recognition trying to break through a wall that had been holding for far too long. "I remember the hallway," she whispered, more to herself than to Adrian, her voice barely steady. Adrian turned his head slightly toward her, not interrupting, not pushing, just listening as if he understood that forcing the truth would only make it disappear again. The video continued, the figure of the man shifting slightly, leaning closer to her, trusting her weight, trusting her direction. Elena's chest tightened at that detail. Because trust was not something you gave a stranger, not like that, not without reason. He was hurt, she said quietly, her brows pulling together. Not injured like an accident, but weak, like he had not slept or eaten or something. Adrian's jaw tightened just enough to be noticeable, his eyes still fixed on the screen. That was the night I went missing, he said, his voice calm but carrying weight now. 24 hours no one could account for. Elena swallowed, her pulse quickening. Again, she forced herself to keep watching, to not look away this time, because every second of that footage felt like a piece of her life returning. The camera angle shifted slightly as the two figures moved further down the corridor, and for a brief moment, the man's face turned just enough toward the light, not clear, not perfect, but enough. Elena's breath caught sharply, her hand pressing flat against the glass of the screen now as if she could step through it. Stop, she said, her voice suddenly stronger. Adrian paused the video instantly, the frame freezing on that exact second. Elena leaned closer, her eyes scanning every pixel, every shadow, every line that tried to hide the truth but could not fully conceal it. Her heart pounded harder now, louder, like it was trying to confirm what her mind was still afraid to accept. That is you, she said, turning slowly toward Adrian, her eyes wide, searching his face for denial, for anything that could make this simpler, but there was none. Adrian met her gaze, steady, unflinching. Yes, he said, no hesitation, no doubt. The words settled between them like something irreversible. Elena stepped back slightly, her mind racing, trying to connect everything, the photo, the footage, the missing memory. But why would I be there with you? She asked, the question coming out faster now, urgent, because the more pieces fell into place, the less control she felt. Adrian exhaled slowly, as if he had asked himself that same question more than once. That is what we are going to find out, he said. Then he reached forward again, not to play the video, but to zoom into the corner of the frame. Elena followed his movement, her eyes narrowing as the image sharpened slightly, revealing something she had missed before, a reflection on the polished metal panel beside them, faint but visible, another figure, standing still, holding something up. Elena's breath caught again, her voice dropping to a whisper filled with disbelief. There was someone else, she said. Adrian nodded once, his expression tightening now. Yes, he replied quietly. Someone who wanted that moment captured. Elena stared at the faint reflection frozen in the corner of the screen, her mind racing to make sense of the third figure. The outline was blurred but unmistakable, someone standing just far enough to remain hidden yet close enough to witness everything. Her fingers slowly curled into her palm as a chill ran through her, not fear, but something colder, something deeper, the realization that this was never just a random moment. It was observed, recorded, preserved. Why would anyone take that picture? She asked, her voice quieter now, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever fragile thread was connecting her to that night. Adrian did not answer immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly as he leaned closer to the screen, studying the reflection with the precision of someone used to finding details others missed. People do not capture moments like that by accident, he said slowly. They do it because it matters. Elena shook her head, stepping back, her breathing uneven now. It does not make sense, she whispered, her gaze drifting away from the screen as if distance could make it less real. I do not even remember meeting you before that night. Adrian straightened, his posture firm again, but there was something different. Now, something less controlled, like the certainty he carried was beginning to shift. Neither do I, he admitted, the honesty in his voice catching her off guard. She looked back at him, searching his face, trying to find any sign that this was some kind of calculated move, but there was none, just the same unanswered question reflected in his eyes, the same gap in memory, the same missing piece. Then how do two people who do not know each other end up in a place like that? She asked, her voice rising slightly, frustration mixing with confusion. Adrian did not respond with words this time. Instead he reached forward and resumed the video, the footage moving again, the hallway stretching longer, the silence between the figures heavier. Elena forced herself to watch, to stay present, because every second felt like it held something important, something she had ignored before. The man in the video, Adrian, shifted again, his weight leaning more into her, and instead of pulling away, she adjusted, supporting him without hesitation, without fear, like it was instinct, like she already trusted him. Elena's chest tightened at that detail, because trust was not something she gave easily, not anymore. "I would not have helped a stranger like that," she said quietly, more certain of that than anything else so far. Adrian paused the video again, turning to her slowly. "Exactly," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "Which means I was not a stranger." The words settled heavily. Between them, Elena's heart skipped, her thoughts racing in different directions, trying to find a version of events that made sense, but none of them fit. None of them explained the missing time, the missing connection, the missing memory. She turned away again, running a hand through her hair as she paced a few steps across the room, the polished floor reflecting her movement in fragmented lines. "There has to be something else," she said, almost pleading now. "Something we are missing." Adrian watched her carefully, then glanced back at the frozen frame, his gaze sharpening as if something had just clicked into place. He leaned in once more, zooming further into the reflection, pushing the image to its limit, the pixels stretching, distorting, but revealing just enough. Elena stepped closer again, her breath catching as the shape of the third figure became slightly clearer, not the face, not yet, but the posture, the way they stood, calm, still, deliberate, holding something steady at chest level. Elena's eyes widened slightly as a new detail emerged, small but undeniable, a glint of light, metallic, attached to the object in their hands, not just a phone, not just a camera, something more precise, more intentional. "That is not just someone taking a picture," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper now. Adrian nodded once, his expression tightening further. "No," he replied, his tone firm, certain. "That is someone documenting it." Elena felt the word linger in the air longer than it should have. Documenting, not capturing, not coincidence, but intention, purpose. Someone had wanted proof, and that realization settled deep in her chest like something heavy and unmovable. She looked back at the screen again, her eyes tracing the outline of that third figure, trying to force her memory to catch up with what she was seeing, but it stayed just out of reach, like a name on the tip of her tongue that refused to form. "Why would anyone document something like that?" she asked, her voice quieter now, not defensive anymore, but searching. Adrian did not answer immediately, his gaze still fixed on the frozen frame, analyzing, calculating. Then he stepped back slightly, crossing his arms as if pulling the pieces together in his mind. "Because it was important to them," he said slowly. "Or because it was important to someone else?" Elena frowned, her brow tightening as that possibility unfolded. Someone else. Someone behind the camera, someone connected to both of them. Her pulse quickened again. "You think this was planned?" she asked. Adrian met her eyes, his expression serious now, no trace of doubt left. "I think nothing about this was random," he replied, the certainty in his tone making her chest tighten again. Elena turned away, pacing once more, her thoughts moving faster now, jumping between fragments of memory and the evidence in front of her, the hallway, the light, the weight of him leaning on her, the strange sense of familiarity she could not explain. "If it was planned, then why do I not remember any of it?" she said, frustration creeping into her voice again. Adrian exhaled slowly, then walked toward the desk, placing both hands on the surface as he looked down at the photo. "Memory does not disappear without a reason," he said, not accusing, not blaming, just stating something that felt uncomfortably true. Elena stopped pacing, her body going still, those words hitting something deeper than anything else so far, because she had asked herself that question before, late at night, when the apartment was quiet and her thoughts were louder than everything else. She just never had an answer. "So what are you saying?" she asked, turning back to him slowly. Adrian looked up, his eyes steady. "I am saying that something happened that night that mattered enough for someone to document it, and mattered enough for you to forget it." The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different, heavier, more real. Elena's heart pounded harder as that possibility settled in, not just a missing memory, but a missing reason. She stepped closer to the desk again, her eyes returning to the screen almost unwillingly, as if she knew it would only pull her deeper. "Play the rest," she said, her voice low but firm now. Adrian did not hesitate this time. He pressed play. The footage resumed, the two figures continuing down the corridor until they reached a door at the far end. Elena leaned closer, her breath slowing as she focused on every detail. The door opened, and for a brief second, light spilled out from inside, brighter, warmer, and something about it struck her, something familiar, something that made her chest tighten again. The camera angle shifted slightly as they disappeared inside, and just before the door closed, the third figure moved, stepping forward just enough to catch the final moment. Elena's eyes widened as the reflection sharpened for a fraction of a second, revealing more than before, not a full face, but enough to recognize a silhouette, a posture, something that felt disturbingly familiar. Her hand lifted again, her voice barely a whisper. "I have seen that person before," she said. Adrian's gaze snapped toward her instantly, sharp, focused. "Where?" he asked. Elena shook her head slightly, her expression strained as she tried to hold on to the fragment of memory before it slipped away again. "I do not know," she said, her voice unsteady. "But they were not a stranger." Elena's words hung in the air, fragile and unfinished, as if they might break if either of them spoke too quickly. She kept her eyes on the screen, but her mind was no longer there. It was moving through fragments, scattered impressions that refused to line up, a voice she could not hear clearly, a presence she could not fully see, something familiar but just beyond reach. Adrian watched her carefully, not interrupting. But the intensity in his gaze sharpened, because this was the first real shift, the first crack in the wall she had built around that night. "You have seen them before," he repeated, slower this time, as if anchoring the thought so it would not disappear. Elena nodded faintly, her hand pressing lightly against her temple, not in pain but in effort. "It is not their face," she said, her voice strained now. "It is the way they stand, the way they hold the camera. It feels—" She stopped, her breath catching as something flickered again, stronger this time, not a full memory, but closer, like a door almost opening. Adrian stepped closer, his voice lower, steadier. "Feels like what?" he asked. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, forcing herself to stay with it, not to push it away like she had done so many times before. The silence stretched, heavy but necessary. Then she opened her eyes again, looking straight at the reflection. "Like someone who was not hiding," she said quietly. Adrian's expression shifted slightly, not surprise, but recognition of the implication. "Not hiding?" he repeated. Elena shook her head slowly, her voice gaining a little strength now. "No, if they wanted to stay unseen, they would not stand like that, they would not hold the camera so steady, they were not afraid of being there." Adrian turned back to the screen, studying the posture again, the stillness, the confidence, the deliberate position just outside direct view, and for the first time, something about it unsettled him, not because it was threatening, but because it suggested permission, access, intention. "Then they belong there," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Elena's chest tightened at those words, because that possibility felt more real than anything else so far. Someone who belonged, someone who had the right to be there, someone connected to that place, to that moment, to them. She stepped closer again, her eyes narrowing as she tried to pull more from the image. "What was that clinic?" she asked suddenly. Adrian glanced at her, then back at the pause frame. "A private facility outside the city," he said. "Not listed publicly, used for confidential cases, high-profile clients, situations that require discretion." Elena frowned, her mind racing again, connecting that detail to the feelings she could not shake. "So, whoever that person was, they could just be there?" she asked. Adrian nodded once, slowly. "Only if they had access," he replied, the word landing with quiet weight. Elena's breath caught again, because access meant connection, and connection meant this was not random, not accidental, not two strangers crossing paths by chance. She looked back at the reflection one more time, her heart pounding as a new thought formed, sharper, clearer. "What if they were not just documenting it?" she said, her voice low but certain now. Adrian's eyes lifted to meet hers, focused, waiting. Elena swallowed, the realization settling in as she spoke. "What if they were making sure it happened?" The room fell into silence again, deeper than before, Because that possibility changed everything. Adrian did not respond right away, but his gaze shifted back to the screen, his mind already moving ahead, already searching for the next piece, the next answer, the next truth that had been hidden too long, and this time neither of them tried to walk away. The silence that followed did not feel empty anymore, it felt charged, like something had shifted from confusion into direction. Elena stood still, her arms no longer crossed, her guard no longer as firm as it had been when she first walked into that office, because now there was something she could not ignore, not just a missing memory, but a pattern forming around it, and patterns meant intention. Adrian moved first, stepping back toward his desk with a new kind of focus, his movements sharper now, more precise, like he had already accepted that this was no longer a question of if, but how and why. He reached for his laptop, opening it quickly, the soft glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. If someone had access to that facility, there would be records, he said, his voice steady but faster now, the calm control still there but layered with urgency. Elena watched him, her heart still unsettled but her thoughts beginning to align. You said it was private, she reminded him. Places like that do not just hand over information. Adrian glanced up at her briefly, a faint, almost ironic shift in his expression. They do when you built half the network they rely on, he replied, not arrogant, just factual. Then his attention returned to the screen as his fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up secured files, encrypted directories, layers of access that would have stopped anyone else long before this point. Elena hesitated, then stepped closer, drawn in despite herself. She had spent so long avoiding this part of her past, or whatever this was. But now it felt like stepping away would only make it worse, the unknown heavier than the truth. What are you looking for exactly? She asked. Adrian did not stop typing, but his voice answered clearly. Entry logs, authorized personnel, anyone who checked in that night, anyone who had clearance to be in that hallway. Elena's breath slowed slightly as she watched the data begin to populate on the screen, rows of names, timestamps, access points, all precise, all recorded, all real in a way her memory was not. Adrian paused, his eyes scanning quickly, then stopping. Narrowing. Elena felt it before he said anything, that shift, that moment when something important had just been found. What is it? She asked, her voice quiet but urgent. Adrian leaned back slightly, his gaze fixed on one line, one entry among many, but clearly different. There is a name here, he said slowly. No last name, no full record, just a first name and a clearance code. Elena frowned, stepping closer, her eyes following his. That does not make sense, she said. Why would someone be listed like that? Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. Because they did not need a full record, he replied. Because whoever entered this did not question it. Elena's pulse picked up again, that same cold realization creeping back. Someone with authority, someone trusted, someone who did not need to explain their presence. What is the name? She asked. Adrian did not answer immediately, his eyes still locked on the screen, as if confirming it again before saying it out loud would make it real. Then finally he spoke, his voice quieter now, more controlled than before. Margaret. The name hung between them, simple, ordinary, but the effect it had was anything but. Elena blinked, confusion crossing her face. I do not know anyone named Margaret, she said, shaking her head slightly. Adrian did not look at her, his gaze still fixed on the screen, but something in his expression had changed, something deeper, more personal. I do, he said quietly. Elena felt her chest tighten at the shift in his tone. The way the certainty from before had been replaced with something heavier, something more complicated. Who? She asked. Adrian finally looked up at her, and for the first time since this began, there was no distance in his eyes, no calculation, just a truth he could not avoid anymore. My mother, he said. The word did not just land, it shifted the entire weight of the room. Elena did not respond immediately because she was not sure she had heard him correctly, not because the name was unfamiliar, but because of what it meant, because of how easily it connected to everything they had just uncovered. Your mother? She repeated slowly, her voice softer now, careful, as if saying it too quickly might change it. Adrian nodded once, but his eyes had already moved back to the screen, scanning the entry again, verifying what he already knew. Margaret Wolfe, he said more firmly this time. She had full clearance in several private facilities before she passed. Elena felt her breath catch slightly at the last part, passed. The word carried its own quiet gravity. She is not alive anymore? She asked. Adrian shook his head, his expression tightening just enough to show that this was not just another piece of information, this was personal. She died 3 years ago, he said, his voice steady but lower now. Elena looked back at the screen, her mind racing, trying to place a woman she had never met into a memory she could not fully access, but something about it felt wrong in a way she could not explain, not fear, not disbelief, something closer to confusion mixed with an unexpected sense of weight. Why would your mother be there? She asked. Adrian did not answer right away, his gaze distant now, not looking at the data anymore but through it, as if something else had surfaced in his mind, something older, something he had not connected until now. She was not involved in my business operations, he said slowly. She worked independently, philanthropy, medical funding, research initiatives, places like that clinic. Elena's chest tightened again as that detail settled in, because it made sense, too much sense, someone with access, someone trusted, someone who would not be questioned. She stepped closer to the desk again, her eyes moving back to the frozen frame, the reflection, the posture, the stillness. You think that was her? She asked quietly. Adrian did not look at her, but his answer came without hesitation. I do not think she was just there, he said. I think she arranged it. The word settled deeper than anything else so far. Elena's heart skipped, her thoughts struggling to catch up. Arranged what? She asked, her voice barely steady now. Adrian turned slightly toward her, his expression no longer just analytical. There was something else there now, something unresolved, something personal. That night, he said, that meeting. Elena shook her head instinctively, taking a small step back, because that possibility felt too deliberate, too controlled. Why would she do that? She asked. Adrian exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a moment before lifting again. My mother did not do anything without a reason, he said, and she never believed in coincidences. Elena's mind raced again, the hallway, the photo, the footage, the presence of someone documenting everything, and now this, a woman with access, with intention, with a reason they did not yet understand. Then she wanted us to meet, she said, the realization forming as she spoke it. Adrian did not deny it, but his silence confirmed it more than words could. Elena's chest tightened again, because if that was true, then nothing about this was random, not the meeting, not the photo, not the missing memory. She looked back at the screen one more time, her eyes locking onto the reflection, trying to see it differently now, not as a stranger, but as someone connected, someone deliberate, someone who had been watching with purpose. But why hide it from us? She asked, her voice quieter now. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, his gaze shifting back to the data. That is the part that does not fit, he said. If she wanted us to know, she would have told me. Elena swallowed, her thoughts moving faster again, something about that statement pulling at the edge of another realization, something just out of reach. Unless she did, she said slowly. Adrian looked at her immediately, his focus sharp again. What do you mean? He asked. Elena hesitated, her hand lifting slightly as if trying to grasp the thought before it disappeared. What if this was how she told you? She said, her voice steadying as the idea formed. Not with words, but with something you would have to find. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different, not confusion, not uncertainty, but something closer to understanding beginning to take shape. Adrian looked back at the photo on the desk, then at the paused footage on the screen, his expression shifting slowly as the possibility settled in, and for the first time since this began, the question was no longer just what happened that night, but what had been set in motion long before either of them realized it. Adrian did not speak right away because Elena's words did not feel like a theory anymore. They felt like something that had been waiting to be understood, something placed deliberately in front of him years ago and only now beginning to make sense. He picked up the photograph again, holding it differently this time, not as evidence, not as a mystery, but as something intentional, something chosen. His thumb brushed lightly across the edge where the light caught Elena's face in the image, peaceful, unguarded. A version of her that did not exist in the present. She always said the truth. Reveals itself when you are ready to see it, he murmured, almost to himself. Elena watched him closely, the shift in his tone, the weight behind his words. It was no longer just about solving a question, it was becoming something personal, something that reached deeper than either of them expected. Then why now? She asked quietly, her voice steady but searching. Adrian looked up at her, his eyes no longer distant, no longer calculating, but focused in a different way. Because something changed, he said. Elena felt her chest tighten again. Because she knew exactly what that something was. She had walked into this office ready to end whatever connection existed between them, ready to close a door she did not even fully understand, and instead, she had opened something far bigger, something neither of them could ignore now. Adrian set the photo down again and turned back to his laptop, his fingers moving quickly. Pulling up another set of files, older this time, archived. Records that had not been accessed in years. Elena stepped closer without thinking, drawn by the quiet urgency in his movements. "What are you looking for now?" she asked. Adrian did not pause, but his voice answered. "If my mother arranged that night, then she would have left more than just a photograph," he said. "She never created something without a trail." Elena's eyes moved across the screen as new files appeared, documents, timestamps, encrypted folders, all bearing dates from around the same time as the footage. Adrian opened one, then another, his expression tightening slightly as he scanned through the contents. "She funded that clinic," he said suddenly. Elena's breath caught. "Completely?" she asked. Adrian nodded once. "Through a private foundation," he replied. "Which means she had full authority over who was there and why." Elena felt the weight of that settle in again, deeper now, more concrete. "So she chose me," she said, the realization forming as she spoke it. Adrian did not respond immediately, but the way his gaze shifted toward her confirmed it. Elena swallowed, her mind racing. "But she did not know me," she added, confusion creeping back in. Adrian turned the screen slightly toward her, revealing another document, a profile, not complete, but enough to recognize. Elena's breath caught as she saw her own name, her own history, details she had never shared with anyone outside a few official records. "She did," Adrian said quietly. Elena stared at the screen, her heart pounding as she tried to process it. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian's eyes moved to another line in the document, a reference, a connection point, something small, but significant. "Through someone else," he said. Elena followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing as she read the name attached to that line, and for a moment, everything else faded, the office, the city outside, the unanswered questions, because that name was not unfamiliar, it was not distant, it was not abstract, it was someone from her own life, someone she had trusted, someone she had never questioned. Her breath caught sharply as the realization hit. "That is not possible," she whispered, but the screen did not change, the name did not disappear, and the truth did not wait for her to accept it. Elena could not look away from the screen even though every instinct told her to step back, to create distance, to deny what was right in front of her. But the name did not blur, it did not fade, it remained there with the same quiet certainty as everything else they had uncovered. Her pulse pounded in her ears as her mind rushed to reconcile the person she knew with the role they now seemed to play. "No," she said again, but this time the word was softer, less certain, her fingers tightening slightly at her sides. Adrian did not interrupt her denial, he simply watched, giving her the space to process what he had already accepted as fact. "You recognize the name," he said after a moment, not as a question but as an observation. Elena swallowed, her throat dry as she finally forced herself to speak it out loud. "Claire," she said, the name barely leaving her lips. Adrian's gaze sharpened immediately. "Claire who?" he asked, his tone controlled but focused. Elena shook her head slowly, her thoughts unraveling faster now. Claire Donovan, she said. She was my case manager when I applied for medical assistance 2 years ago. Adrian's expression shifted slightly, not surprised, but more certain, as if another piece had just locked into place. Case manager, he repeated, his voice lower now. Which means she had access to your records. Elena nodded faintly, her breathing uneven. Everything, she said. My history, my financial situation, my medical files, everything. Adrian turned back to the screen, his fingers moving again, pulling up additional layers of information connected to that name, his movements precise, relentless. Elena watched him, her chest tightening as each second made it harder to pretend this was coincidence. She referred me to that clinic, Elena added suddenly, the memory surfacing now with painful clarity. She said it was a special program, privately funded, that I qualified for. Adrian paused, his eyes flicking toward her. And you trusted her? He said, not as judgment, just fact. Elena let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and disbelief. I had no reason not to, she replied. She helped me when no one else did. The words lingered, heavy now with a different meaning. Adrian leaned back slightly, his gaze returning to the screen. My mother funded the clinic, he said slowly. Claire Donovan had access to your records and directed you there. Elena closed her eyes for a brief second, the connection forming completely now, undeniable. And that night, she started, her voice trailing off as she struggled to say it. Adrian finished it for her, his tone calm but firm. That night was not an accident. Elena opened her eyes again, her heart pounding harder as everything aligned, the clinic, the footage, the photograph, the reflection, the name, all leading to the same conclusion. She knew, Elena whispered. Claire knew about me, and your mother knew about you. Adrian nodded once, slowly. And somehow, they made sure we were there at the same time. The realization settled fully now, no longer a possibility but a truth neither of them could ignore. Elena stepped back slightly, her mind racing ahead to the one question that now mattered more than any other. Why? She asked, her voice steady but urgent. Adrian did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting back to the photograph on the desk, his expression shifting again, not confusion, not doubt, but something deeper, something more personal. That is what we still have not found, he said quietly. Elena followed his gaze to the photo, her eyes tracing the image once more, but this time it felt different, not like a mystery, not like a missing piece, but like something placed intentionally in their hands, something meant to be understood eventually. Her breath slowed as a new thought surfaced, quieter but stronger than before. What if it is not just about that night? She said. Adrian looked at her immediately, his focus sharp again. What do you mean? He asked. Elena hesitated for only a second before continuing. What if that night was just the beginning of something she wanted to happen? The room fell silent again, but this time the silence carried a different weight, not confusion, not uncertainty, but the undeniable sense that whatever had been set in motion had not ended yet, and neither of them had any idea how far it would go. Adrian did not respond immediately because Elena's words did not feel like speculation anymore. They felt like direction, like the next step had already been chosen for them long before this moment. He stood still for a second, then reached for the photograph again, holding it up slightly as if seeing it through a different lens now, not just a memory, not just evidence, but something placed with purpose. Something that had survived time waiting for this exact moment. My mother did not believe in unfinished things, he said quietly. Elena watched him, her eyes steady now, no longer resisting what was unfolding but trying to understand it. Then she expected this to continue, she replied. Adrian lowered the photo slowly, his gaze meeting hers with a clarity that had not been there before. Yes, he said, simple, certain. Elena felt her chest tighten again, because that meant whatever had begun that night was not meant to end there. It was meant to lead somewhere, and they were standing in the middle of it without knowing the destination. Adrian turned back to the laptop, his fingers moving again, opening another folder buried deeper within the archive, this one different, not just records, not just logs, but something labeled with a date months after the night at the clinic. Elena stepped closer, her curiosity pulling her forward despite the unease building in her chest. "What is that?" she asked. Adrian did not look up, but his voice carried a slight shift, something more focused, more precise. "A follow-up file," he said. Elena frowned. "Follow-up to what?" she asked. Adrian opened the file, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because what appeared on the screen was not what either of them expected. It was not a report, not a medical document, not a financial record. It was a series of notes, written, structured, intentional. Elena's eyes moved across the text, her breath slowing as she read fragments, dates, observations, references to both of them. Not by name at first, but by description. Subject A, Subject B. Her pulse quickened again. "This is about us," she said quietly. Adrian nodded once, his jaw tightening slightly as he continued reading. "She was tracking something," he said. Elena leaned in closer, her eyes scanning faster now, trying to take it all in. The notes were not cold, not detached. They carried something else, something more personal, almost like a plan unfolding over time. "Compatibility," Elena read aloud, her voice barely steady. "Behavioral alignment, emotional response, trust formation." She stopped, her breath catching as the meaning settled in. Adrian's expression darkened slightly, not with anger, but with the weight of understanding something he had not expected to find. "She was not just observing," he said. "She was guiding it." Elena stepped back slightly, her mind racing. "Guiding what?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Adrian looked at her, his voice steady but heavier now. "Us," he said, the word landing with quiet finality. Elena shook her head instinctively, but there was no real denial behind it anymore, just the overwhelming realization of what that meant. "That is not possible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Adrian turned the screen fully toward her, pointing to a specific line in the notes. Elena followed his gesture, her eyes locking onto the words as her breath caught again. "Phase 2 initiated," she read softly, her voice almost a whisper now. "Memory interference successful, natural progression expected." The room fell silent, deeper than before, because this was no longer about coincidence or intention. It was something far more controlled, far more deliberate. Elena's hand lifted slightly, hovering near the screen, as if touching it might make it less real. "Memory interference," she repeated, her voice unsteady. Adrian did not look away from her, his expression firm now, grounded in the truth they could not avoid. "That is why you do not remember," he said quietly. Elena's chest tightened, her thoughts spinning as everything connected at once: the missing memory, the unexplained familiarity, the trust she could not explain. It was not gone by accident, it had been taken, shaped, guided. She looked back at the photograph one more time, then at Adrian, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then whatever she started, we were never supposed to stop it." And for the first time since this began, the question was no longer what happened, but whether they were still following a path that had been decided long before they had a choice. Elena did not move for several seconds because the words on the screen had already done what no explanation ever could. They had taken something invisible and made it undeniable. Her breath came slower now, heavier, as if every inhale carried the weight of a truth she had never agreed to carry. "Memory interference," she repeated quietly, not questioning it anymore but trying to understand what it meant for her, for him, for everything that had followed since that night. Adrian closed the file halfway, not shutting it completely, just enough to break the direct line of sight, as if even he needed a moment to process what his mother had left behind. "She would not have done that without believing it was necessary," he said, his voice calm but not distant anymore. There was something conflicted beneath it now, something personal. Elena let out a small breath. That almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Necessary for what?" she asked, turning toward him slowly, her eyes searching his face for something real, something that belonged to them and not to a plan written years ago. Adrian met her gaze, and for the first time, there was hesitation, not in his words but in what he was willing to accept. "For an outcome," he said finally. Elena's chest tightened again. "An outcome we did not choose," she replied. Adrian did not deny it. And that silence felt louder than anything else in the room. Elena stepped away from the desk, her hand running through her hair as she tried to steady herself. The office suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer, the air heavier. Because this was no longer just about understanding the past, it was about what it meant for the present, for the choices she thought were her own. She turned back toward him, her voice firmer now, grounded in something deeper than confusion. If everything that night was planned, and my memory was taken, then everything that came after. She paused, her breath catching slightly. It was not real. Adrian's expression shifted immediately, sharper, more certain. He shook his head once, stepping closer. No, he said, his voice low but firm. That is not true. Elena frowned, the conflict returning to her eyes. How can you say that? She asked. Adrian gestured toward the screen, toward the notes, toward the photo. Because whatever she started, she could not control what happened after, he said. Elena hesitated, the words catching her off guard. Adrian continued, his tone steady now, grounded in something that did not come from the file or the footage but from his own understanding. She could arrange a meeting, she could influence a moment, but she could not force trust, she could not create something that was not already there. Elena's breath slowed slightly as she listened, because that part felt different, that part felt like something she could hold on to, something that belonged to her and not to someone else's plan. Then why take my memory? She asked, her voice softer now. Adrian exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting briefly before returning to her. Because she believed if you remembered, you would walk away, he said. Elena felt that land deeper than anything else, not as manipulation, but as a strange, quiet understanding. Because she knew herself well enough to recognize the truth in it, she would have walked away, she would have avoided anything that felt uncertain, anything that felt too connected to someone like him, someone from a world she had never trusted. Her eyes dropped for a moment, then lifted again, stronger this time. So she took the choice away, she said. Adrian did not argue, but his voice came softer now, more certain in a different way. She delayed it, he said. Elena looked at him, her brows tightening slightly. What do you mean? She asked. Adrian held her gaze steady, unshaken. She delayed your choice until now, he said. Because now you know everything. The words settled into the space between them, clear, undeniable. Elena felt her heartbeat steady for the first time since this began, not because the situation was simpler, but because it was finally hers again, not hidden, not controlled, not decided for her. She looked at the photo one more time, then back at Adrian, her voice quiet but firm. Then this is the part she could not plan, she said. Adrian nodded once, slowly, his expression no longer just analytical, but present, real. Yes, he replied. Elena took a breath, deeper this time, steadying, and for the first time since she had walked into that office, she was not reacting to the past, she was deciding what came next. Elena did not speak immediately because for the first time since she had walked into that office, silence no longer felt like uncertainty, it felt like space, space to choose, space to think, space that had been missing from everything that came before. Her eyes moved once more to the photograph on the desk, but this time she did not see confusion in it. She saw a moment, real and unguarded, something that had existed even if she had not remembered it, something that had been hers before anyone else tried to shape it. She reached forward slowly and picked it up, her fingers steady now, no longer trembling. Adrian watched her but did not move, did not interrupt, because he understood that whatever happened next could not be guided, could not be influenced. It had to come from her. Elena studied the image for a long second, then looked up at him, her voice quiet but grounded in something stronger than before. You were not a stranger to me, she said, not as a question, not as doubt, but as something she had finally accepted. Adrian met her gaze, his expression steady. No, he said. Elena nodded faintly, her eyes softening slightly, as she looked back at the photograph. And I was not afraid, she added, almost to herself. Adrian did not respond right away, but the absence of denial said enough. Elena placed the photograph back down carefully, not as something fragile, but as something complete, something that no longer needed to be questioned the same way. She took a slow breath, then another, grounding herself in the present, not the past, not the plan, not the missing pieces, just this moment, this choice. She turned toward him fully, her posture different now, not defensive, not uncertain, but steady. Your mother may have started something, she said, her voice calm but clear. But she does not get to decide how it ends. Adrian's eyes held hers, and for the first time, there was no distance between them, no mystery, no missing piece, just understanding. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. I agree, he said. Elena felt the weight of that settle, not heavy this time, but grounding, like something finally aligning. She glanced briefly toward the window, the city still moving below, unchanged, unaware, and then back at him. Then we decide, she said. Adrian stepped closer, not invading, not controlling, just present. Yes, he replied. Elena held his gaze for a moment longer, measuring not the past, not the plan, but what was in front of her now, the way he stood, the way he listened, the way he had not tried to force any part of this once it became hers to choose, and something inside her settled, not certainty, not conclusion, but something quieter, something real. She let out a small breath, almost a release. Then here is my answer, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. Adrian did not speak, did not move. He simply waited, because this was the part that mattered, the part no one else could write. Elena's lips parted slightly as she spoke, each word deliberate, chosen, hers. I am not walking away because I am afraid anymore, she said, her eyes steady on his. But I am not staying because someone planned it either. Adrian's expression shifted slightly, not confusion, not doubt, but recognition of the boundaries she was setting. Elena took one final breath, then continued, her voice clear, grounded, and entirely her own. If anything happens between us from this point on, she said, it happens because we choose it, not because it was decided for us. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not heavy, it was open. Adrian held her gaze, and slowly, without hesitation, he nodded. Then we choose, he said. Elena felt something ease inside her at those words, not resolution, not an ending, but the beginning of something that finally belonged to them, not to the past. Not to a plan, not to anyone else's intention. She glanced once more at the photograph on the desk, then back at him, and for the first time, she did not see a mystery. She saw a moment that had led them here, and now, for the first time, the next moment was theirs to create.